Howdy y'all, Caleb here. Today we're going to look at a very specific spell they previewed for the new General's Handbook. It should be coming soon. Hopefully they'll give us some more previews. Maybe there'll be some up here in the next few days. But so far they've only showed us a few rules from the new General's Handbook. But one of them is very, very good. So we're going to look at that now and how we can utilize that in Seraphon in this new edition. In this new General's Handbook. So the first thing to note is that they have a new keyword. Instead of Galatian Champions, we're going to have something called ANDTORIAN LOCUS. And that's going to be a wizard with 9 or less wounds, which is a perfect fit for the Slaanesh. As you know, the Slaanesh has 9 wounds, is not unique, and so they will gain this ANDTORIAN LOCUS keyword, which is probably going to have a lot of use in the new General's Handbook. So, before I was thinking I could run, Coalesce without a Slaanesh. I think that's about to change. I think you're going to be wanting a Slaanesh. At minimum, you're going to need to run some wizards in every army you play now. Luckily, we have quite a few. We have the Starseer, we have the Star Priest, we have the Slaanesh, we have Krox, although Krox won't count as the ANDTORIAN LOCUS because he is unique. We have the Aggradons, but not, it's got more than 9 wounds. So one of the smaller ones, I think you're going to see the Starseer a lot, which I've been playing quite a bit in my games recently and really enjoying the Starseer. But Slaanesh is definitely going to get play in this new General's Handbook. So, will probably be used for battle tactics and stuff like that in the General's Handbook. We haven't seen those yet, but I would imagine there's going to be battle tactics that are specifically designed towards these wizards. So, Slaanesh is going to be very useful. They do have this optimal focus where if you're going second, you get to pick a Locus unit, a Locus hero that can cast an extra spell, unbind an extra spell, or receive an extra command point. So that's kind of nice. If you're not taking a Locus, you can get that extra command point. If you are, you get an extra spell. So pretty good. A little bit of an incentive to go second if you're looking for that. Here's the thing I'm real interested to see what this means. But here at the bottom, we have players may also harness primal magic, earning special dice which can be used to boost casting, unbinding, and dispelling rolls. Ooh, interesting. Seraphon already has some I almost said decent, some very good spellcasting abilities. And so this is going to be interesting to make it a little bit better, but also the opponent's going to get a little bit better at casting as well. This also comes at a risk of primal miscast. It's going to be interesting to see what that is. Maybe does more damage to yourself if you miscast while you're using one of these primal magic rolls. I think we're about to see a lot of magic casting in the game, and Seraphon is set up pretty well to handle that. We have a lot of unbinds, we have board-wide unbinds, we have very strong casters, and so this General's Handbook is going to be very interesting to see how this meta plays out. I think Seraphon is going to be able to handle themselves quite well in this new General's Handbook. But here is the rule that they preview that is just absolutely bonkers, okay? So instead of casting one of your own spells that you have, you can cast from this Lore of Primal Frost. This one's called the Hoarfrost. Hoarfrost is a spell that has a casting value of 8, a range of 12. Now keep in mind, Seraphon, generally we're going to be boosting this up another 6 inches from the Astrolith Banner Bearer, and from our vassal casting. So we can get this a lot of places. So don't let the Holy Within 12 scare you. All right, if successfully cast, pick a friendly unit, wholly within range, invisible to caster. Pick one melee weapon profile on that unit's war scroll and roll a d3. Change the to hit, to wound, or rend characteristic of that melee weapon to match the result until the start of your next hero phase. That is incredible. Okay, so let's work this out. If you roll a 1 or 2, that counts. You're going to change one of these profiles to a 1. Either the hit, the wound, or rend to 1. Now, 1s always fail on hit and wounds, as it says down in the designer's note. But that means you're going to be effectively hitting on 2s or wounding on 2s. That's just great. Now we can get to that on some units, but some units you're struggling to get to that 2-up to hit or 2-up to wound. And so that ability is very good if you're rolling a 1. If you roll a 2, same thing. You can change the hit or to wound to that, or if you need extra rend, do that. But where I think it just really gets bonkers is if you roll a 5 or a 6, that counts as your D3, that counts as a 3. I think you're always changing the rend to 3. We're going to see a lot of rend 3 in this General's Handbook. This spell is just insane. It is hard to cast on an 8, but, Seraphon has plenty of boosts to cast, so it shouldn't be that difficult for us. That's pretty bonkers. A lot of stuff is going to be hitting on rend 3. Now, what I think you're going to want to be putting this on is units that have a lot of attacks that don't have a lot of rend. That's where you're going to want to spend this spell. You could spend it on units that have like a really bad to hit or wound roll, but really you want this on a unit that has a lot of attacks but poor rend, so you can buff that rend up to -3. This also kind of scares me because that means that a lot of the toughness that we have in our army, like Battlepack on a 2-up save, all of a sudden aren't really that tanky. They don't have a ward save in general, and so they're going to be eating -3 rend if you're trying to use these as something to block up the middle of the board, because they're going to be sending a unit at -3 rend to you. So I think we're going to have to readjust some expectations of armor saves, because a lot of things are going to be hitting on -3 rend in this next edition, I think. It kind of goes along that I've said this before, that if you're in combat with something and you're not hitting first with it, it's probably going to die. In Age of Sigmar right now, stuff dies a lot in combat. There's just a lot of damage, a lot of octane out there in the game. And this is going to definitely lean into that. Seraphon has some stuff that we can actually boost this up further. So, to caveat this, look back at this spell. You're changing the characteristic of that weapon profile to that number. That's big because that means you can still stack other things on top of it. One of those is Empower Celestite. So this weapon, or this spell, this is on the Coalesce side in the Coalesce lore that a Slann can cast, is successfully cast. You improve the rend characteristic of that Celestite weapon by 1. So imagine you've just cast Hoarfrost on a unit. They're at 3 rend. You can now empower the Celestite up to 4 rend. So now, let's say our warriors have 4 rend. 10 warriors have 20 attacks they're doing, all going to be at 4 rend. That's pretty crazy. They're definitely not pointed for that. You can also apply this to Aggradons. This also stacks with them. Source Guard, although you probably wouldn't use it there. Not 2 points efficient. Anything source related or that has a Celestite weapon can get this. So that's kind of a nice little bonus there. Another thing that we can add onto this is our Spawn of Chotek. And this rule down here, Glob of Flaming Acid. This basically reduces the save roll of a unit if you can get it to do some damage. I've had varying success with it in the games I've played. I think it's still probably worth taking because when it goes off, it's very good to subtract 1 from their save. So if this goes off effectively, your source Celestite weapons are at -5 rend. At that point, you're doing mortal wounds essentially. This also helps with the entire Starborn side of things. This also helps get more rend there effectively. Another thing that can combo well with this is Celestite Doom from the Starseer. This is a spell that allows you to turn off a ward save. So if you're going up into a unit that has a high armor save, high ward save, one of those two, you have options here. You can hit them with high rend, and you can shut off their ward, or do both if it's if it's a very tanky unit, and essentially all your damage is going through. So I think we have some interesting things in the army that we can stack on to that realm spell that are very interesting. I wanted to take a look at a couple units and kind of talk through maybe what we can do with the spell on some of these units. Source Warriors come to mind first because They do have quite a few attacks in the unit. Not a ton, because you really only have 2 attacks each. In a unit of 10, that's 20 attacks, but it's not bad, and it scales well because you can reinforce this unit quite effectively. If Galatian Veterans goes away, to where they can't, or not, a Bond of Brothers, or whatever it's called, the battalion where these guys can fight in double ranks, clubs are going to suffer a lot. Spears have enough range that you can get these in combat. But you can very easily get 20 Source Warriors in combat. I've done that quite a bit. And you're throwing 40 dice at somebody. When you're doing that, if you have Spears, this might be a case where on the Hoarfrost, if you roll a 1, a 2, you might change that to hit roll down to hits on 1s or 2s. They're going to be charging, so they're already going to be wounding on 2s in Kotal's Claw, which is probably where you're playing these Source Warriors. And then Ren 1. If you've got clubs, just use all-out attack. Spears, probably all-out attack is worth it as well if you're putting that higher rend on these attacks. So with clubs in a battalion where you can fight in double ranks, you're going to have 40 attacks, 2s and 2s, -3 rend, 1 damage. Just quite a bit of output you're going to be able to do there on a unit that shouldn't really have that much damage output. You can also buff this up with the Celestite, Empower Celestite to where it's -4, and maybe you throw the Spawn of Chotek on there for an effective -5 rend, and stuff is going to die to Source Warriors. Aggradon Lancers are an interesting case where the Hoarfrost spell, you can only apply it to 1 weapon profile. So you'll kind of be judging which one you want to add it to, because most of your damage on the Aggradons is coming from the bites and talons. But that's a pretty strong profile. And so you might want to apply Hoarfrost to your Celestite weapons. If you're running Spears to get that extra rend, this is probably a good target to change, to use the 1 or the 2 on. Change that to hit. Your wound rolls are already going to be at 2s because you're charging. And your rend's already pretty decent on these. Now, if you're empowering Celestite on them, probably not the best use of Empower Celestite, but if they're the only things you're sending into combat, your Spears are going to be at 3 anyway. So it might be worth the Hoarfrost just to add the extra rend to the bites and talons, because that's where you're doing the double damage on those attacks. So I think I like using it there if I'm rolling high on the rend. Otherwise, I might be buffing up the Spears. Clubs, anything other than a 1, you're probably going to give it to the rend to maximize your damage. A decent unit to use it on if you're sending them into combat. Not quite as effective probably as Warriors, but still not bad. Raptadon Chargers are an interesting one because they are, as we've talked about before, our most efficient unit in the book as far as like points per damage goes, because they are fairly cheap and they do quite a bit of damage. They are very fragile though. But they throw out a lot of dice. You got 5 models in a unit, and they're going to have a total of 6 attacks each. So you have a lot of attacks going out here. As we look at what we want to buff up with the Hoarfrost spell, it's all about that rend. You're going to throw that rend on Topek's Lance if you can. If it's the 2 or the 3 option, you're going there. If you rolled the 1, then you're probably going to change that Topek Lance to a 1 to hit, so you get a better hit roll on that, and it'll still help you get damage through on there because you're going to be hitting on a more quality attack on the hit roll. I did include some of the damage calculations here. This is using the extra rend on the Raptadons, and I kind of wanted to show the difference here between on an objective and not, because it is significant. I've had a couple games now with the Raptadon Chargers where I wasn't able to attack on objectives just based on the battle plans. Maybe a objective was removed. Maybe they lined up to where they purposefully weren't on the objective just because they knew I was going to charge with these chargers in that turn. And that really takes your damage down quite a bit. It makes them a lot less effective. Most of the time, I can find myself attacking something on an objective, but it doesn't always happen. So keep that in mind as we talk about damage numbers. So rend always on the lances if you can do it. If not, go for the to hit on Topek lances. All right, let's see. Kroxigor. Here's one I was really excited to see what the numbers would come out with because they have such a terrible to hit roll and a weird way. You know, these Kroxigors have weird buffs into them. This is the normal Kroxigor, and so I think this is probably the better unit to use them on because you have some flexibility. If you roll low on Hoarfrost, you apply it to the to hit roll. If you roll high, you're giving it to the rend. I did the math and was trying to figure out, is it better to buff up the Moonstone Hammer on the one model that has it because it's doing 3 damage, or the 2 that have the Drake Bite Maul because you can only do one of those melee profiles. Every time I would run it, it was always, more attacks is better. So you buff up the 2 models that have the Maul, not the one with the Moon Hammer. But if you roll low, buff up the to hits. If you roll high, get the rend. I think that's kind of how most of these are going to work out. And it's nice that there's some flexibility there. Kroxigor Warspawned. The rend wasn't quite as important here. I really like buffing up that to hit roll better. But if you do roll high, again, give it to the rend. Because +1 to rend basically is still good. Anything else you're going to put on that war pick to hit. And these are good units to do it to. Kroxigor are decent ones to do it to. All right, here is I was running the numbers. I included this on here. Hopefully it's not too small. Hopefully you can read that. I was trying to figure out, if we apply this to our standard units that we'd kind of be doing it to, what would be the output? And lo and behold, the Raptadon Chargers are still the most effective unit that we've got to apply this spell to. You can see here, I've ran the numbers using our average damage versus 4. That's in that second column. All out attack, just to see what kind of damage it would do there. Hoarfrost to hit. What does that look like? Hoarfrost, I'm buffing up the wounds, but then I'm also applying all-out attack because that's generally what you'd be doing. The same thing for Hoarfrost at Rend 2 and Hoarfrost at Rend 3, both with all-out attack applied to that unit as well, because that would kind of be your standard attack profile. And you can see the Raptadons are still doing the most damage in the book based on those units there and these buffs. Followed closely by Kroxigor and Lancers, the Aggradon Lancers. The Warriors are doing pretty good, not too far behind them, and those Warriors kind of fulfill that double role of being a hammer and an anvil in this case. Kroxigor Warspawned weren't doing quite as well as I had hoped. I thought they would do a little bit better, but they already have decent rend, and so really your best buff was that to hit. Source Guard, I just threw that on there, hoping that maybe they would come up a little bit higher, but they didn't really. You can see that second to last column is our points per damage, and that's how many points are you paying per 1 damage on these units. And Raptadons are still the most efficient, followed by Kroxigor with these buffs all applied. Aggradons are coming in. Not nearly as efficient. They form a little bit different role because they are tougher than Raptadons. Generally, they're going to be -1 damage. They have a 4 save instead of a 5-up. So they perform a little bit different role, but they just don't throw as many dice out there as the Raptadons do. So the Raptadons just take buffs so well that they are really, really nice to be able to buff up with and send in. You see the increase here. That last column is the increase. How much does this spell help? And you can see it increases everybody's output quite a bit. The Warriors, it really increases, almost doubling the output of the Warriors, which means, this scales very well with those Warriors. A big block of them. You throw on Hoarfrost and throw on Empowering Celestite, back it up with a spawn of Chotek, and these guys will shred anything. So get some of these combos off, and it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, that's it for this one. I think that spell is going to be just absolutely amazing. We'll see what the rest of the General's Handbook looks like, but I'm excited about the spell. This is definitely making me reconsider some of my coalesce lists because I definitely need a caster in this, and one that has usually some buffs to get that 8 casting value off. In Starborn, it's probably not changing my list building at all because I already have enough wizards in there. I'm not even worried about this. I'm going to have these ANDTORIAN LOCUS in about, that's going to be half my list in my Starborn list. So Starborn is going to be playing very well into this next General's Handbook. So, all right, guys. We'll see y'all next time.